Today is January 5th, 2026. My name is Rob Carr of Kalamazoo Right to Life, and this is Pro-Life Week. Well, I trust everyone had a joyous Christmas and a Happy New Year. It is hard to believe that 2026 has arrived. You know, I guess it's the old adage that the older you get, the more quickly the years scurry by. So for someone my age, the years do seem to be clicking along at a rapid pace. But today I just want to talk about two different topics, and I guess we'll jump right in. You may recall last year that the Trump administration has had a real concerted effort to defund Planned Parenthood. I think we've known that for a while. And I know the pro-lifers in Congress have been wanting to do this for quite a long time. And in that big, beautiful bill, there were provisions to remove funding for Planned Parenthood. And later on in the summer, maybe it was in the fall, a federal judge, I believe she might have been an Obama appointee, put a restraining order on that defunding. And that was challenged. And this news is coming, I believe, New Year's Eve. So let's charge in. The Trump administration can continue to defund the Planned Parenthood abortion business. So that is good news. To continue to defund, not to fund, but to defund Planned Parenthood. That's the new ruling from a federal appeals court. The ruling by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit lifts a preliminary injunction issued in, and here's the name of the case, State of California versus Department of Health and Human Services, that sought to block a provision of the One Big Beautiful Bill which defunds major abortion companies like Planned Parenthood. In July, Judge Tawani, I think her first name was Indira, issued a preliminary injunction at the request of 22 Democratic-led states. That, too, was slapped down on December 8 by a separate three-judge panel comprised of Biden and Obama appointees. In undoing Judge Tawani's preliminary injunction, the First Circuit's December 30th decision, so I guess it wasn't New Year's Eve, restored the federal government's ability to withhold Medicaid funds from providers who perform abortions. Very noteworthy, however, is that throughout all of the legal gymnastics, Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood affiliates that perform abortions has been frozen. Praise the Lord for that. Planned Parenthood filed the original lawsuit on July 7th of 2025, 3 days after Trump signed the Big Beautiful Bill, which is kind of a weird title, but that's kind of what Trump called it, so I guess we'll stick with that. The decision involves one of many lawsuits against the One Big Beautiful Bill and its defunding provision. The lawsuits include 2 filed in Massachusetts by 21 states and the District of Columbia, 1 from the Planned Parenthood abortion business itself, and a 3rd from the state of Maine. In each of the cases, appeals courts have been ruling in favor of Congress, President Trump, and their ability to defund the nation's biggest abortion business. And the National Right to Life Committee, not surprisingly, weighed in. And this is a quote from their president, Carol Tobias. Quote, "This ruling is an important reminder that the federal government has both the authority and the responsibility to ensure taxpayer dollars are not used to subsidize elective abortion." I'm continuing here. The First Circuit correctly recognized that HHS is likely to prevail on the merits. Americans overwhelmingly oppose being forced to fund abortion. And we've known that for decades. And this decision helps restore accountability and respect for long-standing federal law, which really would be like the Hyde Amendment. The one big beautiful bill signed into law on July 4th of 2025 includes critical provisions that halt the use of taxpayer dollars to subsidize the abortion industry. It passed narrowly in Congress after a strong show of resolve from pro-life lawmakers. So whether or not this is going to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court remains to be seen. But at the appellate, obviously, we know there are three levels of the federal courts. There's the district level, the lowest level, and then that can be appealed to the Court of Appeals. And then there could be another appeal to the Supreme Court. So it has reached the second tier, the appellate court, and we'll see if these states, these 22 states, appeal to the Supreme Court. And here again, the Supreme Court has been very receptive to pro-life issues. And it's very, very possible that we could get a 5-4 or a 6-3 ruling in favor of defunding Planned Parenthood. Okay, second item. New research utilizing a national random survey of American women aged 41 to 45 years found that prolonged grief disorder is common after both induced abortions and natural losses, like a miscarriage. And, I think back to the waning days of Ronald Reagan's administration. So that would be like January of 1989, just weeks before George Bush was going to take over. And the Surgeon General at that time under Reagan was C. Everett Koop, and he had been commissioned to study the methodology of research to determine if there are psychological or emotional problems associated with induced abortion. And he conducted research and looked at dozens and dozens of studies. And he came to the conclusion that the research did not support either the pro-life or the pro-choice position. He said he knows that there's emotional stress and grief and complications to abortion. He knows that from personal experience. But he said the evidence based on the research did not bring him to that same conclusion. So he said it was inconclusive, the results. And he was criticized by that, even by some pro-lifers. But he admitted and said, I know there are complications, emotional and psychological complications from abortion, where women go through grief and great guilt and shame, and that can come out in a variety of ways, whether it's by a divorce or a broken relationship or drug addiction or alcohol or just depression. There's a lot of things that can happen in that process of grief that can't be resolved without God, really, to restore the person's self-worth. So let me keep reading about this new research. So that was 30 years ago. New research utilizing a national random survey of American women aged 41 to 45 found that prolonged grief disorder is common after both induced abortions and natural losses. The research investigated the degrees of grief and complicated grief attributed to natural and induced pregnancy losses based on 1,925 surveys, which is a pretty good sample. Of these 409 respondents, like 21%, reported a history of induced abortion, and 573 women, or basically 30%, had a history of miscarriage or other natural losses. These rates are close to national averages, indicating a representative sample. And here are some bullet points. Over 60% of aborting women report that they felt pressured to abort contrary to their own preferences. 24% describe their abortions as unwanted or coerced. Now, I'll be using the term unwanted a few times here, and it's not that the baby's unwanted. They're saying here that the abortion was unwanted or coerced. So when I say unwanted, we're not talking about the baby, we're talking about the abortion was unwanted. But the woman did it anyway because she was coerced. In the third bullet point, unregulated abortion empowers abusers, denies women the help they need to avoid unwanted abortions, and enriches unethical abortion providers. A peer-reviewed medical study has revealed that 64% of women with a history of abortion felt pressured to abort contrary to their own preferences. Like I said, 24% describe their abortions as coerced. In addition, the more pressure women face, whether from other people or circumstances, such as financial pressures, the more severe they are likely to report negative mental health outcomes, disruption of relationships, and impacted grief. In short, unwanted abortions, not babies, unwanted abortions are also unsafe. They do more harm than good. The simple truth is that most abortions are contrary to what women would truly prefer, if only they had support from family, friends, and society. Most women feel trapped, not liberated. Of course, the abortion industry pretends that all abortions are freely wanted and overwhelmingly beneficial. Indeed, Planned Parenthood's propaganda claims that the most prominent feeling after abortion is relief. But these are lies, very dangerous lies. So we've known this all along. We've known this for years, that women experience grief. The difference is that a lot of times, and we've known this too, a lot of times women who've had abortions do not go through the process of guilt or shame for 5, 6, 7 years after their abortion. Initially they're relieved they're not pregnant, and there is that sense of relief. But over the long haul, 5 years later, maybe like on the anniversary of their abortion or the anniversary of that initially projected due date, the shame, the grief, the bitterness, those things come to the surface, and they are reflected by a lot of dysfunctional outcomes. And this new study seems to indicate that this is very common, and it's just a shame that the American public is not made aware that women do grieve from those abortions and have extreme shame for how they aborted that little baby. And it's only through Christ and through his forgiveness and saving grace that we can overcome our guilt and embrace the abundant joy that only he can give. With that, I'll let you go, and I'll see you next time.